Hi, it's Paul here, and wanted to bring you this episode on the limits of science, as well as the surprising insight that the Bible may shed where science has limits. So, I've mentioned this in a bunch of episodes, but the reality is that for many of us, we pride ourselves or have thought of ourselves as being modern people, rational. We believe in real things that are hard and substantial. We believe in science. We don't like to think of ourselves as naive or foolish or taken in by any kind of superstition. And so the modern mind is very prone or tempted to think of anything in the realm of religion as simply superstitious or naive. And therefore, to go to the other extreme, everything I believe, then we often want to say, is based on evidence, is based on particularly scientific evidence. And I've shown my thought process many times on this, that I think science cannot actually inform us on many important things in life. And I think with just a moment of reflection, it's an obvious thing. I mean, who has stayed up crying at their dining room table over the patterns of the seed spreading of deciduous forests of North America, or the breeding patterns of the Atlantic salmon in Canada? I mean, it's not something where the intricacies of the fields of scientific endeavor are the things that really grip us, that move us, that break our heart. That's not that sort of thing. It's usually acceptance or rejection. It's our relationships. It's our hopes and dreams. It's our painful memories and our deferred wishes. And so there is a kind of an obvious built-in hierarchy to what we care about, what really matters to us. And I'm not saying that science doesn't matter, and I'm not even saying that the deciduous forests and the salmon don't matter. Of course they do. They do matter. I'm simply kind of drawing an obvious point that the things that matter to us the most are not even the results of science. And even when I mentioned the forest and the salmon, you might think, well, they're important and I care what happens to them. Yeah, that is true, but science can't tell you that you should care about them. Science itself can't give you that. That's a value that you place, and you didn't get that value from science itself. Science can report things as they are discovered to seem to occur mechanistically and through causal relationships, but it can't tell you what to value. So even if you say, yeah, I value the forest and the salmon, right, but why? It's not because of science itself. That's not where it comes from. And so a simple point, but it has to be made, I think, over and over. In fact, science really doesn't touch the whys of life at all. It doesn't touch meaning. And we are why creatures. We are meaning creatures. And I don't think we're wrong or foolish for being why and meaning creatures, but science simply does not and cannot touch those areas because it is not within the purview of science to do so by definition and by design. You even think about well, how and why does science work? Can science prove or explain why science works? No, it can't. So if you think that science works and you have a reasoning of why, that thought process and that reasoning is like a shell within which science can function. But the shell, the container of science, is not scientific. Why can you trust your own judgments? Why can you trust your equations that you develop to model something scientifically? Why can you trust your understanding of the equations, your observations in the first place, the consistency over time between your observations? That is something that is above, it's meta to science. Science can be nested in that, but what is the nest? What is the container? It's got to be something broader, bigger, and outside of science itself. Of course, science can't tell you what to study. There are a billion plus things you could study, and science can't help you decide what is valuable or worthy of pursuit or investment enough to study. Science can't tell you what to do with the developments that come from science. It can help you discover how to build an atomic bomb, but it has nothing to say about how to deploy or whether or when to deploy that atomic bomb. It doesn't care if you use 1,000 of them to destroy the entire human race on Earth. That's not a judgment that science can make. And so just an area after area, you see that science has this, it's very profound, it's very powerful, but it has a very tightly defined region where it influences and speaks. And this is something that I think is it could be obvious, but I don't think it really registers to us as obvious often. You think about the horrors of the 20th century, you think about World War I and the human-created hell. Science has nothing to say about that. When you think the horrors of World War II and the living nightmare that was enacted and perpetuated over years in multiple places by multiple people groups with their various justifications. Science has nothing to say about that. Nothing to say about those things. And yet in those situations, the human heart senses that they're very important, that what happened was tragic, that it was something sacred was offended, violated, lost, that the pillars of the earth were shaken, that something that happened, something that mattered happened. But again, it's not from a sense of science that comes from. And so very clearly, science has a very tight boundaried sphere where it speaks into, and most of the things that are important in life, the why, the meaning, the judgment, the what's sacred, what's valuable, science does not speak to those things. And I want to kind of jump tracks here and kind of come back to this topic, but from a very different angle. And so I want to bring the Bible in, because the Bible has a way of talking that I think is intended. The purpose of it is to address these huge areas where science is silent, where science does not speak. The Bible does speak. And I want to come to this with a little schematic that I drew, and I got this from somebody. And so when you think of the Bible, one of the main themes in the Bible, people a lot of times think that one of the main themes is heaven and hell. We think of them as these two sort of counterweights that are equal and opposite. But really the heaven and hell dichotomy is not something that's prevalent in the Bible. You won't, if you look up heaven and hell like as a phrase in a concordance, you'll get no hits. But if you look up heaven and earth, you'll get a tremendous amount of hits all the time. I mean, biblically, these are the constituent elements of reality. This is one way to think of it. Heaven and earth. And so in our modern, rational, materialist way of thinking, when we hear heaven and earth, we can be tempted to think, oh, okay, the writers of the Bible itself is trying to portray cosmology, like the way the earth and the universe is arranged materially. And so we think of the earth, we imagine a globe, which is how we understand the earth to be formed, that rotates and revolves. We picture that kind of with a perspective from space. And heavens, we might think of heaven, or we might think of the sky and then outer space above that. And that is somewhat how these terms are used in the Bible. So earth can definitely refer to land and the land that we walk on. And heavens includes the skies and whatever is above that, what we now call outer space, but that's kind of a modern concept, modern understanding. But the way these function biblically goes beyond just land and sky. It includes those, but it goes beyond that. It's deeper and it's more interesting, actually. So here's the schematic. So you like my high tech? You can't read that. Okay, that's my writing. You've got heaven above and earth below, and then mankind in the middle. And it's a fascinating template or paradigm. You've got heaven, the place where truth resides. It is also where God makes his home, but it's where truth resides, ideas, principles, emanations, seeds, all these things that are immaterial, but real and true. They exist in this realm of heaven or the heavens. And things that are corporeal, material, generally speaking, objects, facts, that is part of the earth, part of the paradigm. And so when humankind is in the middle, that's very meaningful, because that means that humankind has this very special mediating role to be able to see and perceive the things from heaven, the things that are incorporeal, that are ideas or seeds or truths. But humans have this, we're material. We're just like the animals and the plants, and that we're made from the dust of the earth. But yet we've been infused with the breath, the spirit that came from the heavens, from God. And so we have both aspects, and we perceive both aspects, and we mediate between both aspects. And so this is the special role, biblically, the special role that humans have been given, the vocation to mediate between heaven and earth, to be a representative of God on earth, to be an image bearer. And I think that's a fascinating paradigm, because, well, I mentioned that science itself doesn't really have, can't explain why, or, can't explain why or how science works, because that's outside of the purview of science. It's by definition bigger or broader than science itself, the practice of science. And so what's interesting is, I think this paradigm, this biblical paradigm, actually does serve as the container for understanding why and how science works. And I'll use another little diagram for this. By the way, I should say, that little diagram, as simple as it was, I got it from this book, The Language of Creation. I don't know if that reads frontward or backwards on the video screen, but by an author named Mathieu Pajot. And it's a great book, so I'll probably reference it in future things as well. But that's where I got that diagram and that concept from. Heaven and earth as a paradigm for understanding the vocation of humankind as mediator between heaven and earth. And so if you kind of think of that in terms of science, like, what is a scientist doing? A scientist is seeing what's going on earth, looking at facts, looking at objects, and hypothesizing, right? This is the realm of the idea, the seed, the thought, the truth. Like, how does this work? And then comes up with maybe some sort of rough theory or hypothesis, and then tests it. Like, so sees the facts, goes up and gets an idea, and then brings it back down to the facts. Like, let me test it, let me experiment, see if this holds true over and over. And then from that can bootstrap up a theory or a revision to the hypothesis to create a theory. And so it's just constant mediation from material to immaterial and from immaterial to material. It's the human, the scientist, is mediating between them. So here was my little diagram for that. You've got ideas up here in the realm of the heavens. You've got facts down here in the realm of the earth. And the science, the mediator's right there in the middle, mediating between the two. And, I'm pretty sure humans are the only ones that really do science per se. We're the mediators of these two realms. And I think that's a fascinating concept. I was reading this book called Mindsight by Daniel Siegel. He's a psychiatrist or psychologist, and he really wanted to understand the human mind. And so not necessarily just the human brain, but something a little more abstract and distributed than that, with the human mind. Like, what is it, and distinctive? And so he gathered interdisciplinary scientists of different varieties, psychologists and psychiatrists, neurobiologists, computer scientists, all these different groups. And he said he wanted to get them to kind of try to agree, like, what is the human mind? We all study it. We use the terminology, but what is it? We need to understand what it is and have a working shared definition. And so the neurobiologist said something like, well, it's just the biological functions of the brain in a very neurobiological perspective. The psychiatrist said, well, it's the thoughts and feelings inside of us, very psychiatrist-y definition. The computer scientist said it's an operating system, a very computer sciencey. So what they landed on, what Daniel Siegel reports that they landed on, was it is a relational and embodied process of regulating the flow of energy and information. An embodied process of regulating the flow of energy and information. And I just coincidentally was reading this book at the same time as The Language of Creation, Matthew Pageau book, and I thought he is saying approximately the same thing, which is this human mind thing, this thing that's distinctive within the natural world. What does it do? What is it? It is a process that's embodied, facts, earth, material, but it is able to perceive energy and information flow. It perceive it and then shape it, redirect it, add to it, form it, arrange it with and in that body, in the realm of earth. So things coming from heaven, coming in, I see it, I perceive it, I decide what to do, I reshape it, I repackage it, I add to it, arrange it, and redirect it out, or distribute it out, or whatever. But his definition of the human mind, and so all the interdisciplinary people agreed that this was a good shared working definition of the human mind. And it is very close to that diagram with the scientists taking ideas and truths from heaven, testing it and verifying it with the earth, revising the theory, shaping it as it goes out back up to the heavens. And that other diagram that came before that of just the biblical model of humans in that special mediating role between heaven and earth. And so that was just a really interesting coincidence of reading those two things at the same time, but I thought they jibed very well. And again, science is limited. It can't tell you why, it can't provide meaning, it can't tell you why or how science works, it can't tell you what to study or what to do with it. It's very limited. And the realm that the Bible is speaking into with this heaven and earth is, I think, quite a good fit for that container of explaining how and why this works in terms of this is what a human is. It's not something where every human just decides what their identity is and what their purpose is, and you have to create it from scratch. We're really trying that as a society. Like, we're really trying to create our identity from scratch ourselves, individually, whole cloth. And I think people are struggling and dying under the weight of that, because we're not meant to do that. That's an assumption, that's a conclusion, that's a belief, but it is challengeable. And I think we have a role, we have an identity. Of course, it can be negotiated, and of course, things are going to emerge from ourselves that help shape and describe that. But to start from scratch is a huge burden on anybody and everybody. And I don't think we need to do that. So wanted to bring you this video on the limits of science and how the model that is being described symbolically in Scripture is something that really can help with forming that picture, with forming that model and understanding. So hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.